Hi there, I'm Skaji. I'm a practicing witch and a professional tarot nerd, and today I'm a storyteller. I'm so glad you're here. This is part 2 of A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, abridged and adapted after a fashion by me. This novella was first published on December 19, 1843. When Scrooge first awoke, it was so dark that looking out of bed he could scarcely distinguish the transparent window from the opaque walls of his chamber. He was trying to pierce the darkness with his ferret eyes when the chimes of the old wall clock struck the 4 quarters. So he listened for the hour. To his great astonishment, the tinny bell went from 6 to 7, then from 7 to 8, and regularly up to 12, then stopped. 12? It was past 2 when he went to bed. The clock was wrong. Marley's ghost bothered him exceedingly. Every time he decided that it was all a dream, his mind flew back again and presented the same problem to be worked all through. Was it a dream or not? Scrooge lay in his bed, perplexed and bothered, until the chime had gone 3 quarters more, when he remembered of a sudden that the ghost had warned him of a visitation when the bell tolled 1. He resolved to lie awake until the hour was past, and considering that he could no more go to sleep than to fly about the room, this was perhaps the wisest resolution in his power. The time passed so slowly that he was more than once convinced he must have nodded off into a doze and missed the clock. At length it broke upon his listening ear. Ding dong! 1/4 past, said Scrooge, counting. Ding dong! 1/2 past, said Scrooge. Ding dong! 1/4 to it, said Scrooge. Ding dong! The hour itself, said Scrooge triumphantly, and nothing else. He spoke before the hour bell sounded, which it now did with a deep, dull, hollow, melancholy 1. Light flashed up in the room upon the instant, so bright and startlingly white that the frightened Scrooge pulled his quilts over his head. Scrooge then felt the covering quilts being pulled, I tell you, by a hand. The quilts were pulled slowly, but with a force so insistent that Scrooge could not resist. At last, when his face was again uncovered, Scrooge found himself face to face with an unearthly visitor standing aside his bed. It was a strange figure, appearing at once like a child, and then like a shrunken old man. Its hair, which hung about its neck and down its back, was white as if with age. And yet the face had not a wrinkle in it, and the tenderest bloom was on the skin. It wore a tunic of the purest white, and round its waist was a shimmering belt, the sheen of which was beautiful. It wore about its brow a crown of bright green oak boughs, and its tunic was trimmed with summer flowers. In its hand it held a single small and white candle. But the strangest thing about it was from that candle there sprung a bright, clear jet of light, by which all this was visible. "Are you the spirit, sir, whose coming was foretold to me?" asked Scrooge. "I am." The voice was soft and gentle, singularly low, as if instead of being so close beside him, it were at a distance. "Who and what are you?" Scrooge demanded. "I am the ghost of Christmas past." "Long past?" inquired Scrooge. "No, your past." "And what, tell me, compelled you here?" "Your welfare," said the ghost. "A restful and uninterrupted night's sleep would accomplish the same," protested Scrooge. The spirit must have heard him thinking, for it said immediately, "Your reclamation, then. Take heed." It put out its small hand as it spoke, and clasped him gently by the arm. "Rise and walk with me." It would have been in vain for Scrooge to protest that the weather was too foul and the hour too late for going about, that he was dressed only for bed in his dressing gown and nightcap and slippers. The grasp, though gentle as a child's hand, was strong and could not be resisted. Scrooge rose, but finding that the spirit made towards the window, clasped at his robe in supplication. "I am but a mortal," Scrooge said, "and liable to fall." "Bear but a touch of my hand there," said the spirit, laying it upon his heart, "and you shall be upheld in more than this." As the words were spoken, they passed through the wall and stood upon an open country road with fields all around. The city had entirely vanished. Not a vestige of it was to be seen. The darkness and the mist had vanished with it, for it was clear, cold, and a wintry day with snow upon the ground. "Good heaven," said Scrooge, clasping his hands together as he looked all about him. "I was born in this place. I was a boy here." The spirit gazed upon him mildly. Its gentle touch, though it had been light and instantaneous, appeared still present to the old man. He was conscious of 1,000 smells floating in the air, each one connected with 1,000 thoughts and hopes and joys and cares long, long forgotten. "Your lip is trembling," said the ghost. "And what is that upon your cheek?" Scrooge muttered, with an unusual catching in his voice, that it was nothing, and begged the ghost to lead him where he would. "You recollect the way?" inquired the spirit. "Remember it!" cried Scrooge with fervor. "I could walk it blindfolded." "Strange to have forgotten it for so many years," observed the ghost. "Let us go on." They walked along the road, Scrooge recognizing every gate and post and tree, until a little market town appeared in the distance, with its bridge, its church, and winding river. Some shaggy ponies were now seen trotting towards them, with boys upon their backs, who called to other boys in country wagons and carts driven by farmers. All these boys were in great spirits and shouted to each other until the broad fields were so full of merry music that the crisp air itself laughed to hear it. "These are but shadows of the things that have been," said the ghost. "They are not aware of us." The merry travelers came on, and as they came, Scrooge knew and named them every one. He was delighted beyond measure to see them, but why? Why did his cold eye glisten, and his heart leap up as they went past? Why was he filled with gladness when he heard them give each other Merry Christmas as they parted at the crossroads and byways for their several homes? What was Merry Christmas to Scrooge? Out upon Merry Christmas, what good had it ever done him? "The school is not quite deserted," said the ghost. "A solitary child, neglected by his friends, is left there still." Scrooge said that he knew it, and he sobbed. They left the high road by a well-remembered lane and soon approached a building of dull red brick, with a little weather-vane-topped cupola on the roof and a bell hanging in it. It was a large building, but one of broken fortunes, for the spacious rooms were little used, their walls were damp and mossy, their windows broken, and their gates decayed. The yards were overgrown with grass and its flower beds overrun with weeds. Nor was it any better within, for entering the dreary hall and glancing through the open doors of many rooms, they found them poorly furnished, cold, and vast. They went, the ghost and Scrooge, across the hall to a door at the back of the building. It opened before them and revealed a long, bare, melancholy room, made barer still by lines of simple desks and plain wooden benches. At one of these, a lonely boy was reading near a feeble fire, and Scrooge sat down upon a bench and wept to see his poor forgotten self as he used to be. Not a single echo in the house, not a squeak from the mice within the walls, not a drip from the half-thawed waterspout in the dull yard behind, not a sigh among the leafless boughs of one despondent poplar, not the idle swinging of an empty storehouse door, no, not a crackling in the fire that fell upon the heart of Scrooge with a softening influence, and gave a freer passage to his tears. The spirit touched him upon the arm and pointed to his younger self, intent upon his reading. "Why does he read here alone?" Scrooge wiped liberally at his fare with the sleeve of his robe. "Does he have no home to go to?" insisted the spirit. "None that will welcome him," Scrooge answered. "He reads, and in the pages of his books he finds homes, and family, and adventures aplenty." Scrooge did not know how, no more than we do, how the dreary room around his younger self was transformed. But transformed it was. Suddenly, a man in foreign garments, wonderfully real and distinct to look at, with a great curved sword through his belt, leading through the desert by a bridle a camel, heavily laden with bags and boxes positively brimming with treasure. Scrooge exclaimed with a joy one would have scarcely thought him capable of, "There is Aladdin! One Christmas time, when yonder solitary child was left here all alone, he did come for the first time, just like that. Poor boy!" And again, without sound or artifice, the scene was changed from the driest desert and was at once a roiling sea upon which rocked a tall sailing ship. Here and there upon the deck strode such a colorful collection of sailors as one had ever seen. "There's the parrot!" cried Scrooge. "Green body and a yellow tail, with a thing like a lettuce growing out of the top of its head. There he is!" And on it went thus, one scene changing into another, and with each change old Scrooge delighted all the more. To hear Scrooge expending all the earnestness of his nature on such subjects, in a most extraordinary voice, between laughing and crying, and to see his heightened and excited face would have been a surprise to his business friends in the city indeed. At last, the dim and lonely room appeared once more, revealing the lonely reader having nodded off, with his head, lightly dreaming, laying gently upon the pages of an open book. Then, with a rapidity of transition very foreign to his usual character, he said in pity of his former self, "Poor boy." And he cried again. "I wish," Scrooge muttered, putting his hand in his pocket and looking about him, after drying his eyes with his cuff. "But it's too late now."
"What's the matter?"
asked the spirit. "Nothing," said Scrooge. "Nothing. There was a boy singing a Christmas carol at my window last night, and I should have liked to give him something. That's all." The ghost smiled thoughtfully and waved his hand, saying as it did so,
"Let us see another Christmas."
Scrooge's former self grew larger at the words, and the room became a little darker and more dirty. The panels shrunk, the windows cracked, fragments of plaster fell out of the ceiling. But how was all this brought about? Scrooge knew not. He only knew that it was quite correct, that everything had happened so, that there he was, alone again when all the other boys had gone home for the holidays. He was not reading now, but walking up and down despairingly. Scrooge looked at the ghost, and with a mournful shaking of his head, glanced anxiously towards the door. It opened, and a little girl, much younger than the boy, came darting in, and putting her arms around his neck, and often kissing him, addressing him as her dear, dear brother. "I have come to bring you home, dear brother," said the child, clapping her tiny hands and bending down to laugh. "To bring you home, home, home." "Home, little Fan?" returned the boy. "Yes," said the child, full of glee. "Home for good and all. Home for ever and ever. Father is so much kinder than he used to be, that home's now like a dream. He spoke so gently to me one dear night when I was going to bed, that I was not afraid to ask him once more if you might come home. And he said, yes, you should, and sent me in a coach to bring you." The child, opening her eyes, said, "And are never to come back here. But first we're going to be together all the Christmas long, and have the merriest time in all the world." "Look how big you've grown, little Fan," exclaimed the boy. She clapped her hands and laughed, and tried to touch his head, but being too little, laughed again and stood on tiptoe to embrace him. Then she began to drag him in her childish eagerness towards the door, and he, ready to go, accompanied her.
"Always a delicate creature, whom a breath might have withered,"
said the ghost.
"but she had a large heart."
"So she had," said Scrooge. "You're right. I will not gainsay it, Spirit."
"When she died,"
said the ghost,
"she had, I think, children."
"One child," Scrooge returned.
"True,"
said the ghost.
"Your nephew."
Scrooge seemed uneasy in his mind, and answered briefly, "Yes." Although they had but that moment left the school behind them, they were now in the busy thoroughfares of a city, where shadowy passengers passed and repassed, where shadowy carts and coaches battled for the way, and all the strife and tumult of a real city were. And it was made plain enough by the dressing of the shops that here, too, it was Christmas time again. But it was evening, and the streets were lit up and shining. The ghost stopped at a certain warehouse door and asked Scrooge if he knew it. "Know it?" said Scrooge. "I was apprenticed here." They went in, at sight of an old gentleman sitting behind such a high desk that if he had been 2 inches taller he must have knocked his head against the ceiling, Scrooge cried in great excitement, "Why, it's old Fezziwig! Bless his heart, it's Fezziwig alive again!" Old Fezziwig laid down his pen and looked up at the clock, which pointed to the hour of 7. He rubbed his hands, adjusted his capacious waistcoat, laughed all over himself from his shoes to the top of his head, and called out in a comfortable, rich, fat, happy voice, "Yo-ho there, Ebenezer! Richard!" Scrooge's former self, now grown to a young man, came briskly in, accompanied by his fellow apprentice. "Richard Wilkins, to be sure," said Scrooge to the ghost. "Bless me, yes, there he is. He was very much attached to me, Richard was." "Yo-ho, my boy," said Fezziwig. "No more work tonight. Christmas Eve, Richard. Christmas, Ebenezer." "Heidi-ho!" cried old Fezziwig, skipping down from the high desk with wonderful agility. "Clear away, my lads, and let's have lots of room here. Heidi-ho, Richard. Chirrup, Ebenezer." Clear away? There was nothing they wouldn't have cleared away, or couldn't have cleared away with old Fezziwig looking on. It was done in a minute. Desks and boxes and bundles and all you could imagine were packed off and put away as if they were dismissed from public life forevermore. The floor was swept and watered. The lamps were trimmed, fuel was heaped upon the fire, and the warehouse was as snug and warm and dry and bright as a ballroom as any you would desire to see upon a winter's night. In came a fiddler with a music book and went up to the lofty desk and made an orchestra of it. In came Mrs. Fezziwig, one vast substantial smile. In came the 3 daughters Fezziwig, beaming and lovable. In came 6 young men whose hearts they broke. In came all the young men and women employed in the business, and in came the housemaid with her cousin. In came the cook with her brother's particular friend, the milkman. In came neighbors and guests from all over the way. In they all came, one after another, some shyly, some boldly, some gracefully, some awkwardly, some pushing, some pulling. In they all came, anyhow and everyhow. The fiddler began a lively tune, and away they all went, 20 couples all at once, all dancing a square, round and back again the other way, down the middle and up again, round and round as the fiddler sawed away at his tune. And when it was done, old Fezziwig, clapping his hands, cried out, "Well done!" And there were more dances, and there were games, and more dances, and there was cake, and there was hot cider, and there were pies, and there was a great feast all laid out around the room. But the great effect of the evening came after the feast, when the fiddler wound up a lively tune indeed. Then old Fezziwig stood out to dance with Mrs. Fezziwig, and all around them the company danced vigorously, but none with such vigor as Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig. When the clock struck 11, this domestic ball broke up. Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig took their stations, one on either side of the door, and shaking hands with every person individually as he or she went out, wished him or her a Merry Christmas. When everyone had retired but the 2 apprentices, they did the same to them. And thus the cheerful voices died away, and the lads were left to their beds, which were under a counter in the back shop. During the whole of this time, Scrooge had acted like a man out of his wits. His heart and soul were in the scene and with his former self. He corroborated everything, remembered everything, enjoyed everything, and underwent the strangest agitation. It was not until now, when the bright faces of his former self and Richard were turned from them, that he remembered the ghost, and became conscious that it was looking full upon him, while the light upon its candle burnt very clear.
"A small matter,"
said the ghost,
"to make these silly folks so full of gratitude."
"Small," echoed Scrooge. The spirit signed to him to listen to the two apprentices who were pouring out their hearts in praise of Fezziwig, and when he had done so, said,
"Why, is it not? He has spent but a few pounds of your mortal money, $3 or $4 perhaps. Is that so much that he deserves this praise?"
"It isn't that," said Scrooge, heated by the remark, and speaking unconsciously like his former, not his latter self. "It isn't that, Spirit. He has the power to render us happy or unhappy, to make our service light or burdensome, a pleasure or a toil. Say that his power lies in words and looks, in things so slight and insignificant that it is impossible to add and count them up. What then? The happiness he gives is quite as great as if it cost a fortune." He felt the spirit's glance, then stopped.
"What is the matter?"
asked the ghost. "Nothing particular," said Scrooge.
"Something, I think,"
insisted the ghost. "No," said Scrooge, "no. I should like to be able to say a word or two to my clerk just now, that's all." His former self turned down the lamps as he gave utterance to the wish, and Scrooge and the ghost again stood side by side in open air.
"My time grows short,"
observed the spirit.
"Quick."
This was not addressed to Scrooge or to anyone whom he could see, but it produced an immediate effect. For again Scrooge saw himself. He was older now, a man in the prime of his life. His face had not the harsh and rigid lines of later years, but it had begun to wear the signs of care and avarice. There was an eager, greedy, restless motion in the eye, which showed the passion that had taken root, and where the shadow of the growing tree would fall. He was not alone, but sat by the side of a fair young girl in a mourning dress, in whose eyes there were tears, which sparkled in the light that shone out from the ghost of Christmas past. "It matters little," said she softly, "to you, very little. Another love has displaced me, and if it can cheer and comfort you in your time to come, as I would have tried to do, I have no just cause to grieve." "What love has displaced you?" he rejoined. "A golden one." "This is the way of the world," he said. "There is nothing on which it is so hard as poverty, and there is nothing it professes to condemn with such severity as the pursuit of wealth." "You fear the world too much," she answered gently. "All your other hopes have merged into the hope of being beyond the chance of poverty. I have seen your nobler aspirations fall off one by one until the master passion, gain, engrosses you, have I not?" "What then?" he retorted. "Even if I have grown so much wiser, what then? I am not changed towards you." She shook her head. "Am I?" asked Scrooge, incredulous. "Our love is an old one. It was made when we were both poor and content to be so. until in good season we could improve our worldly fortune by our patient industry. You are changed. You were another man then." "I was a boy," he said impatiently. "Your own feeling tells you that you were not what you are," she returned. "I am. That which promised happiness when we were one in heart is fraught with misery now that we are two. How often and how keenly I have thought of this, I will not say. It is enough that I have thought of it and can release you." "Have I ever sought release?" "In words, no, never." "In what, then?" "In a changed nature, in an altered spirit, another hope at its great end, in everything that made my love of any worth or value in your sight. If this had never been between us," said the girl, looking mildly but with steadiness upon him, "tell me, would you seek me out and try to win me now?" "Oh, no." He seemed to yield to the justice of this supposition in spite of himself, but he said with a struggle, "You think not?" "I would gladly think otherwise, if I could," she answered, "and I release you, with a full heart, for the love of him you once were. May you be happy in the life you have chosen." She left him, and they parted. "Spirit," said Scrooge, "show me no more. Take me home. Why do you delight to torture me?"
"For one shadow more,"
exclaimed the ghost.
"No more!" cried Scrooge. "No more! I don't wish to see it. Show me no more!"
But the relentless ghost held him in both his arms and forced him to observe what happened next. They were in another scene and place, a room, not very large or handsome, but full of comfort. Near to the winter fire sat a beautiful young girl, so like that last that Scrooge believed it was the same, until he saw her, now a comely matron, sitting opposite her daughter. The noise in this room was perfectly tumultuous, for there were more children there than Scrooge in his agitated state of mind could count, and each child was conducting itself like 40. The consequences were uproarious beyond belief, but no one seemed to care. On the contrary, the mother and daughter laughed heartily and enjoyed it very much. But now a knocking at the door was heard, and such a rush immediately ensued that she with laughing face was borne towards it in the center of a flushed and boisterous group, just in time to greet the father, who came home attended by a man laden with Christmas toys and presents. The shouts of wonder and delight with which the development of every package was received, oh, the joy and gratitude, they were all indescribable alike. It is enough that by degrees the children and their emotions got out of the parlor and, by one stair at a time, up to the top of the house, where they went to bed, and so subsided. And now Scrooge looked on more attentively than ever when the master of the house, having his daughter leaning fondly on him, sat down with her and her mother at his own fireside. And we thought that such another creature, quite as graceful and as full of promise, might have called him father, and had been a springtime in the haggard winter of his life. His sight grew very dim indeed. "Belle," said the husband, turning to his wife with a smile, "I saw an old friend of yours this afternoon." "Who was it?" Guess."
"How can I?"
"Tut, don't I know?" she added in the same breath, laughing as he laughed. "Mr. Scrooge." Mr. Scrooge it was. I passed his office window, and as it was not shut up, and he had a candle inside, I could scarcely help seeing him. His partner lies upon the point of death, I hear, and there he sat alone, quite alone in the world, I do believe.
"Spirit," said Scrooge in a broken voice, remove me from this place."
"I told you, these were shadows of the things that have been,"
said the ghost.
"that they are what they are. Do not blame me."
"Remove me," exclaimed Scrooge. "I cannot bear it."
He turned upon the ghost, and seeing that it looked upon him with a face in which some strange way there were fragments of all the faces it had shown him, wrestled with it.
"Leave me! Take me back! Haunt me no longer!"
Scrooge despaired, and in his despair he pulled down his nightcap over his brow as though he wished nothing more than to climb completely within it. Yet even with his eyes covered so, Scrooge still observed that the ghost's candle was burning high and bright. And dimly connecting that with its influence over him, he squeezed his eyes closed as tightly as he could manage. And still he knew the Spirit's light was all about him.
"Leave me! Take me back! Haunt me no longer!"
Scrooge exclaimed once again, and soon found himself with his own dim and lonely room. He was conscious of being exhausted and overcome by an irresistible drowsiness, and further of being in his own bedroom, and had barely time to fall into bed before he sank into a heavy sleep. I hope you've enjoyed this second installment of A Christmas Carol. A happy solstice, Merry Yule, Merry Christmas, and Happy Hanukkah to everyone. Thank you for spending some of your time with me today. If you've enjoyed your time, please like, subscribe, share, and comment. I'm Skaji. Safe journeys.